The man on the floor weighed 260 pounds. 3 regional titles. 7 years of professional fights. He had not lost a single match that morning. He lost this one in 23 seconds, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning. To the moment their revolving door opened, and the entire room made the first mistake of the day. His name was Ethan Cole. He was 34 years old. He had a wrinkled collar, a duffel bag worn soft at the strap, and a 5-year-old girl holding his left hand with both of hers. Because that was how she always held it. Both hands, like she had decided a long time ago that own was not enough. The laughter began before he had fully cleared the door. He did not slow down. He did not look at the people laughing. He crouched, adjusted the collar of his daughter's coat, said something to her that no one else could hear, and then stood, squared his shoulders, and walked across the marble floor toward the registration desk. The room had already decided what he was. It had not yet learned what that would cost them. The Callaway Group occupied the top 19 floors of a building that had been designed to communicate one thing above all others: that the people inside it were not to be taken lightly. 61 floors of gunmetal glass rising over the financial district. The kind of building that made other buildings feel like suggestions. The lobby that Tuesday morning held 58 candidates for the position of executive protection lead to CEO Mara Voss. They had arrived in the particular posture of men who have spent years being paid to look dangerous, and have become very comfortable in that performance. Former special operations, decorated officers. A former professional wrestler who had pivoted into private security work and still moved like he expected people to clear his path. The air smelled like leather and ambition and expensive cologne applied with intention. Derek Marsh, acting head of security and the man responsible for today's selection process, crossed the lobby the moment he spotted Ethan at the registration desk. Derek was 41, broad, and possessed of the particular cruelty that belongs to men who have never had their assumptions corrected by someone smaller than them. This isn't a nursery, friend. The children's program is down the street. A current of laughter moved through the room. Ethan looked at Derek with an expression that contained no heat, no injury, and no performance. He said his name. He said he had a 9 o'clock appointment. He said his daughter's name was Ivy, and that she would wait at the desk and would not be a problem. Then he walked through the door into the assessment hall. Derek watched him go. Something crossed his face. Brief, unreadable, and then hair covered and followed. The first round had nothing to do with strength. It was a judgment assessment. Situational questions, a threat identification exercise, a reviewed CV, 3 minutes at a standing desk. One assessor, no preparation time. The candidates who went before Ethan arrived with printed service records, laminated credentials, and the practiced confidence of men who believed documentation was the same a thing as capability. One of them had brought a portfolio binder, tabbed, color-coded. Another opened with the sentence, "I've been doing this for 16 years, and said it the way a man says a thing he has already decided should end the conversation." Ethan came to the desk with one piece of paper. On it, a single phone number and 4 words. "Call if you need context." The assessor looked at it, then looked at him.
Derek, standing nearby with his arms folded and the expression of a man performing patience, let out a breath through his nose that was not quite a laugh, but was close enough to one that the room registered it. The second exercise was a 90-second threat environment video, a crowded venue, multiple actors, a principal figure in the foreground. Candidates had 30 seconds to identify danger points and outline a response protocol. The professional wrestler identified 3 of the 7 marked positions and spoke with a volume that substituted for precision. Ethan watched the video once. He stood still for 4 seconds. Then he said, 7 marked, 3 unmarked. The man in the gray jacket near the east pillar has repositioned his weight 4 times. He is waiting for someone to move first. The blind angle behind the stage, left speaker bank gives an unobserved approach for only 6 feet. And the woman in the 3rd row is not watching the stage. She is watching the exits. Silence. Derek said, "Lucky Red." Ethan said nothing. He returned to his seat on the 22nd floor inside a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Mara Voss in front of a monitor showing the assessment feed. She had a pen in her hand. She had not written anything in 11 minutes. Her assistant, standing near the door, said carefully, "He doesn't look like the others." Mara said, "No, he doesn't. The bracket was posted on the board at 10:15. The room read it with the focused attention men who understood what it meant. Most match-ups were seasonable, one was not. Derek had scheduled Ethan Cole against Marcus Hale. Marcus weighed 260 pounds, held 3 regional MMA titles, and had ended every match that morning within 40 seconds. He was the most obvious choice for the position, and he knew it. He had been having a good day. He read the bracket and smiled, not a cruel smile, because Marcus was not a cruel man. He simply did not see it as a contest. The other candidates drifted to the edges of the mat. Someone raised a phone. The mood in the
room became the particular kind of comfortable that settles in when everyone has already decided the outcome. At the reception desk down the hall, Ivy had stopped drawing. She was watching through the narrow window beside the desk, her chin resting on her folded arms, her stuffed bear forgotten beside her. The receptionist said quietly, "Is your dad going to be okay?" Ivy considered this with the seriousness of someone for whom the question had a known answer. He doesn't lose. But he never makes a big thing of it after. The timer started. Marcus came forward immediately. No hesitation. The same sequence that had worked 6 times already that morning. Close the distance. Establish grip. Control the weight. Ethan moved back. Not scrambling. One precise step. Weight shifted to the outside edge of his right foot, redirecting Marcus's approach angle by a fraction of a degree. Barely visible. The grip closed on air. The room did not understand what had happened. Marcus recovered and came again and again. Each time, Ethan offered something, a partial opening, a half step of apparent uncertainty, and each time the follow-through found nothing there. On the 22nd floor, Mara had stood up from her desk without deciding to. Her right hand had found the window frame at some point without her noticing. She was watching his eyes. They were not tracking Marcus's hands or feet. They were still. He was reading something deeper, some sequence of information that lived below the level of individual movement. At the 16th second, his expression changed, a small contraction. He had seen what he needed. He stepped in instead of back. What followed took 7 seconds. One arm controlled Marcus's elbow at the joint, a precise adjustment to his center of gravity. Not a throw, a redirection so exact that Marcus's own momentum completed the movement. The technique was not MMA. It was not boxing. It was nothing the room could comfortably name. Marcus Hale, 260 pounds, 3 regional titles, hit the mat face down and did not move. Total time, 23 seconds. No one spoke. Ethan stepped off the mat, walked down the hall, crouched to Ivy's level and said, "All done. Want to find a snack?" Ivy said, "Can I have the ones with the cheese?" He said, "Obviously." He took her hand, and they walked toward the hall exit. Behind them, no one had thought to lower their phones. He was hired before the other 57 candidates had finished waiting. Mara called him upstairs while the bracket was still running. Derek received the notification on his phone, read it once, and went very still in the way of a man recalculating something he thought was already settled. The first week, Ethan worked like a presence rather than a person. He stayed exactly 1 step behind Mara, not 2, not beside her, 1 step. The distance was precise enough that she noticed it on day 3 and said nothing because there was nothing to say. It was simply correct. He knew which conference rooms needed to be read before she entered them. He identified the tension in a meeting before the conversation surfaced it. He knew which members of her board were performing loyalty and which ones were not performing anything because they had nothing to perform. In 9 years as CEO of the Callaway Group, Mara Voss had never had a security detail she forgot was there. She found herself forgetting now, not because he was absent, but because his presence had become so functionally integrated that distinguishing it from the environment required deliberate effort. She also noticed that he did not look at her the way people usually looked at her. The particular low-grade performance energy that occurred around power, the slight overpositioning of the body, the careful calibration of eye contact, was absent in him. He was not positioned toward her because she was important. He was positioned toward her because she was his responsibility. The distinction took her 4 days to name, and longer than that to stop thinking about. On the 7th day, the threat announced itself. An anonymous message arrived in her personal inbox. 11 words: "The restructuring vote next week is not what they've told you." Attached was a screenshot of a clause from a partnership agreement she had signed 8 months prior, a clause her legal team had ascribed as standard language. That same evening, Ethan found a 14-minute gap in the parking level security log. No footage, no error code, just the gap, which was technically impossible unless someone had created it deliberately, someone with system access and a reason to need those 14 minutes to disappear. He did not report it immediately. He made a copy, closed the original file, and sat in the security office for a long time, looking at what he recognized. He had spent 6 years in a unit that specialized in internal network compromise. He knew what the early architecture of a betrayal looked like. He was looking at it now. The emergency board session was scheduled for Thursday at 2. The official framing was a routine restructuring review. What Ethan had pieced together over 11 days of peripheral tracking told a different story. 3 external visitors had been registered under a firm name that did not appear in any Callaway vendor database. 2 of the building's service elevators had been accessed after hours using maintenance badges that had not been checked out through the standard system. And on Wednesday evening, the motion sensors on the 22nd floor had registered a 6-second anomaly in the eastern corridor. 6 seconds during which they detected presence and then stopped detecting it, which meant they had been overridden rather than fooled. The picture that assembled itself from these pieces was this: someone intended to access the Callaway central server during the board session, when every decision maker would be in honor room, facing one direction, focused on one problem. The server held contracts and client data for 400 corporate accounts. In the hours before a forced leadership transition, that data was worth more than the restructuring itself. Ethan had 35 minutes. He moved through the building without running, efficient, committed. He cleared the lower floors, confirmed the boardroom was sealed, placed his secondary contact at Mara's side, and went to the 22nd floor via the rear fire stairwell. They were already there. 4 of them, professional and unhurried, moving toward the server room with the confidence of people who had been told the floor would be clear. It was not clear. What followed was not a prolonged fight. Prolonged fights happened when there was uncertainty about the outcome. Ethan had spent 6 years learning to remove uncertainty as quickly as possible, and he applied that knowledge now without performance or hesitation. The first 2 were controlled before the third had finished processing what was happening. The third came from the left. He had anticipated the angle from the moment he identified the team's formation. The fourth was the largest and lasted longest, 9 seconds. Foreman Derek appeared the east from the eastern quarter, holding a firearm and the flat expression of a man who had been rehearsing this moment. "I need 12 minutes. Walk away, and this doesn't have to become anything larger." Ethan looked at him. His right shoulder had taken impact in the last exchange. He registered it, filled it, and moved on. "I don't have 12 minutes." The confrontation lasted less than a minute. Derek was skilled. He was also operating on the logic of threat. Ethan was operating on the logic of necessity. In close quarters, necessity has a specific and reliable advantage. Downstairs, Mara received the update through her earpiece 40 seconds into the board chair's opening remarks. She absorbed it. She processed it. She returned her face to its baseline configuration and waited for the board chair to finish his sentence. Then she said, "This session will need to be postponed. Law enforcement will explain the reasons within the next few minutes, and the restructuring clause, Article 7, subsection C, will be contested under the fraud nullification provision. I have the dumication. I've been building it for 8 days." The board chair looked at her. The room was very quiet. She looked back at him with the direct focus of someone who had finished being diplomatic. The hospital was not where Ethan had planned to end his Thursday. He declined the first ambulance the way he declined most things he didn't need. Calmly, without explanation, already moving toward the exit, Mara met him in the lobby. She looked at his shoulder. She looked at his shirt. She held up her car keys and said, "I'm driving." He started to say something. She was already walking. At the intake desk, she gave his name, his date of birth, and his insurance information without looking at her phone. She had reviewed all personnel files the weekend after his hiring, a fact she had not mentioned to him and did not mention now. The intake nurse looked at her, then at Ethan, then back at her with a careful and diplomatic neutrality. In the exam room, Mara took the gauze from the supply shelf and began working on the cut on his forearm without asking permission, which he noticed. "You know how to do this?" "No," I learned quickly. He watched her work. He did not say anything further. Ivy arrived 20 minutes later, escorted by his contact, who had called the sitter and driven over when the sitter wasn't answering. The girl came through the door, covered the distance to her father in 4 steps, and held his hand without speaking, both hands the way she always did, for a long moment before looking up at Mara. "Is it your fault?" "No, it was the job." Ivy considered this. The reasoning was acceptable. She looked at Mara again, finding something in the woman's face that answered a question she hadn't spoken aloud. "Can you stay? I don't like when Dad's alone and hurt." Mara pulled her chair closer to the wall. She sat down. "Okay." By 11, the corridor was mostly quiet. Ivy was asleep on the waiting bench, her bear tucked beneath her chin, Mara's jacket folded under her head. Mara sat without moving, one hand resting lightly near the girl's shoulder. Ethan stood in the doorway of the exam room, cleared for discharge. He watched them in the yellow corridor light for a long time and did not speak. Then he walked back in and sat on the other side of the bench, so that Ivy lay between them with her bear, occupying the exact center. After a while, Mara said quietly, "She drew something for me last week. Left it on my desk." He waited. 3 people in front of a house, she said. With a tree, Ethan was quiet. The corridor light made its low, even sound above them. Ivy breathed in the slow, trusting rhythm of a child who had decided, without evidence and without condition, that the world around her was held, for the first time in the entire length of that long and broken day, for the first, perhaps, in considerably longer than that. The corner of Ethan Cole's mouth moved small. Quiet, unmistakably a smile,